All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida. So a note to our internet audience watching at home, if at any time during the presentation you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, you could just call the number on your screen. We will take care of that for you. We will get it signed, and we will ship it to you wherever you are in the United States free of charge. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to present Ms. Meryl Comer and her new book, Slow Dancing with a Stranger, Lost and Found in the Age of Alzheimer's. Ms. Comer is an Emmy Award-winning reporter, producer, and business talk show host with over 30 years' experience in broadcast journalism. She is president and CEO of the Jeffrey Bean Foundation Alzheimer's Initiative, which promotes early diagnosis, global innovation challenges, and national public awareness campaigns. She is also a recipient of the 2005 Shriver Profiles in Dignity Award and the 2007 Proxmire Award. In this book, she brings us a profoundly personal, unflinching account of her husband's battle with Alzheimer's disease. With harrowing honesty, she brings readers face to face with this devastating condition and its effects on its victims and those who care for them. Here to tell us more about it, please give a very warm welcome to Ms. Meryl Comer.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for mentioning 30 years in television. That puts me somewhere between virginity and death. We'll have to take that. Thank you for joining us. You know, having been a journalist for many years, I know if you scratch the surface of everyone's life, there is pain from somewhere. Caring for a loved one, all disease is cruel. We're here to talk about one specifically. I vowed, having been a journalist, never to write a book, although I love being surrounded by these delicious books at Books and Books. Because I had interviewed so many people with nothing to say. And I thought, well, I'm never going to do that. And I thought, well, besides, I'm not very interesting. I work hard, both of us work, but the disease has changed me. Alzheimer's has made me fearless. I used to be appropriate, and that was really boring. But this disease, having lived with it for now almost 20 years, nothing stops me because it's not about me. It's really about the next generation. It's about our children. So I stepped out. Now, the reason I stepped out was we're not having an honest conversation about this disease that is about to be a global epidemic in the world. Much more impactful than Ebola, where the world was up in arms about it, and they should be. That said, this is the disease that will define our generation if we're not careful. So I came out in a very honest way. Now, to survive 20 years of being a caregiver, I had to live forward and let things go. And I never said, woe is me, because I see pain everywhere. I see pain with children with disease. I see friends who have had breast cancer. I see pain. So I've never complained. But I also had to live forward to get through from crisis to crisis. So I had no notes. And when I was asked to write the book, I wanted to do public policy. But what would happen when I started writing is that the policy sounded pedantic, and they said, just tell your story, just tell your story. So I sat down, and late at night during my night shift, and I still do a 12-hour shift every day for both my husband and my mother, who has the late stage of the disease, I wrote. I call myself a POA. I'm a prisoner of Alzheimer's. I'm an extension of his disease. I feel compelled to speak out for both victims, because they have no voice, and for caregivers who are worn out. This will be our epidemic. This is the dark side of longevity. I just saw it young. So it's like being witness to the future. I'm afraid for all of us. So my wish for Harvey is that I just don't wear out or give up, or there's an episode where I can't manage it somehow. To me, it's time for a generation to say, unacceptable. This is not the way we want to end our lives. Than I am about myself. How many qualify in that list? Are we here out of need, out of curiosity for a loved one, a friend? Are there any doctors, lawyers, or politicians? Oh! That's great. Thank you. Well, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Levine, who is joining us. I had introduced you earlier.
Hi, thank you.
He came in earlier, and he's going to be joining us later for the conversation. So
Right here if you need me.
thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate
The politicians, you put it together with the politicians and the lawyers.
And what have we got? A fight, a good fight. That's what I'm... we need to know that things are changing in this country. Before everyone over 55, their two concerns was cancer or Alzheimer's. That statistic has just changed. A new study came out from Meryl and AgeWave that now says that this is the scariest disease, not just for those of us 55 or older, but for our children. They are watching us take care of our parents or a loved one, and they fear for their own health and well-being. So the impact is growing. Look at the numbers. 44 million worldwide. This is a global epidemic, huge in China, Japan, the developing world, wherever you have aging populations. It is also the health crisis of our generation. I'm going to show you some numbers. I'm sorry, this is what I used to do for a living. But you'll see the $215 billion is spent annually on care in this country, on care. And if you look at that little line at the very bottom in red, less than 1% spent on research. 215 billion annually on care and 415 million on research at a time when baby boomers are turning 65 at the age of 4 million a year for the next 20 years. There will be 76 million people by 2030 with this disease that has no cure. It is not a normal part of aging. We have lived past the HIV/AIDS. We have lived past the cancer and heart disease. This is the disease that I call the dark side of longevity. Why are we stuck in this space? Let's take a look. The reason I'm here is because this is where people love to come to retire. But you want to be well and healthy in retirement, and remember you can retire. The probability of longevity. The average man will live to be about 85, the woman 88. If you're married, you probably do better. You can live to be 92, gentlemen. I want you to take note of that. But there's pressure on us. As a generation, we're redefining what aging looks like. One of the downsides of my writing the book is that I can't pretend that 70 is the new 50. They keep putting my age into everything that they write about. So I can't pretend anymore. But look at the role models. Look what we have to live up to these days, that takes a lot of work, even for a young guy, all right? But we as a generation were saved from this picture. How many of you remember this picture? We are the generation that was rescued from polio by a vaccine. Now, the other issue is that as we age, we have a young spirit, but look at the issues. I find this the most depressing slide I've ever seen. And I'm sharing with you, just pick 1, 2, or 3. You name it, all right? Now, this is the signs of aging. What's important for you to look at is there is a 50% risk for Alzheimer's if you are overweight, if you have a concussion, if you have a metabolic disorder, if you are menopausal. So these are the very big issues. We're taking the future for granted. We're living in the moment. We have to look out. If we don't look out and start raising hell with legislators, both at the state level and in Congress, this disease will be the burden for the next generation. Now, let's be honest. I have one story. When I wrote the book, there are no photographs. It's my story, but it's everybody's story. There are over 15 million caregivers just like me, and I consider caregivers along a spectrum, whether it's young couples with children with autism or post-traumatic stress syndrome. We sent young men and women to war. We owe them a future. They're getting increased dementias. And at the other end, we have Alzheimer's. I'd like to show you what happens in the space. And how many of us are worried about a senior moment? Raise your... from time to time. All right. Part of the thing is that we multitask. All right. The other part is this is what happens to the brain and why this disease creeps up on people. And smart people hide out for a very long time, which is why diagnosis is so difficult.
Alzheimer's is a slow, fatal disease of the brain affecting 1 in 10 people over the age of 65. No one is immune. The disease comes on gradually as 2 abnormal protein fragments called plaques and tangles accumulate in the brain and kill brain cells. They start here in the hippocampus, the part of the brain where memories are first formed. Over many years' time, the plaques and tangles slowly destroy the hippocampus, and it becomes harder and harder to form new memories. Simple recollections from a few hours or days ago that the rest of us might take for granted are just not there. After that, more plaques and tangles spread into different regions of the brain, killing cells and compromising function wherever they go. This spreading around is what causes the different stages of Alzheimer's. From the hippocampus, the disease spreads here to the region of the brain where language is processed. When that happens, it gets tougher and tougher to find the right word. Next, the disease creeps toward the front of the brain, where logical thought takes place. Very gradually, a person begins to lose the ability to solve problems, grasp concepts, and make plans. Next, the plaques and tangles invade the part of the brain where emotions are regulated. When this happens, the patient gradually loses control over moods and feelings. After that, the disease moves to where the brain makes sense of things it sees, hears, and smells. In this stage, Alzheimer's wreaks havoc on a person's senses and can spark hallucinations. Eventually, the plaques and tangles erase a person's oldest and most precious memories, which are stored here in the back of the brain. Near the end, the disease compromises a person's balance and coordination, and in the very last stage, it destroys the part of the brain that regulates breathing and the heart. The progression from mild forgetting to death is slow and steady, and takes place over an average of 8 to 10.
For now, incurable. Everyone is slightly different. Some people become very gentle and mellow. Some become very difficult and dangerous. You don't want to generalize, but there are commonalities. And the issue, does sex matter? As president of the Jeffrey Bean Foundation, I launched a global challenge to ask that question, because if you recall in heart disease, if you go back 15 or 20 years, this was a man's disease. It didn't affect women. Well, if we began to do research on sex-based differences, we found it was one of the biggest killers of women. So that was transformational in the cardiovascular space. And I said, well, why not ask this question? We outlive men statistically, so we are more prone to get the disease. The scientists don't yet know why, but what we do know is that if it's on the maternal side, you're more likely to get the disease than not. And women progress faster into the disease than men. Smart people hide out in the disease for a long time because that part of the brain that involves memory goes into overdrive and they become difficult, or not the people you knew. You'll all have, everyone here has a story to tell of someone they've seen, someone they know, or someone they've loved. So I ran a global challenge. And I asked the question, now let me ask you, because this is a hard topic, but how many think men's brains and women's brains are different? Raise your hands. All right, well, let's take a look and see what they say.
We're going to start discussing men's brains, women's brains. We're going to start discussing men's brains, women's brains, and how they're very different from each other. Now, I want to start with men's brains. All right, now men's brains are very unique. Men's brains are made up of little boxes. And we have a box for everything. We've got a box for the car. We've got a box for the money. We've got a box for the job. We've got a box for you. We've got a box for the kids. We got boxes everywhere. And the rule is the boxes don't touch. When a man discusses a particular subject, we go to that particular box. We pull that box out. We open the box. We discuss only what is in that box. Now, women's brains are very, very different from men's brains. Women's brains are made up of a big ball of wire. And everything is connected to everything. And it's all driven by energy that we call emotion. It's one of the reasons why women tend to remember everything.
It's a gentleman who's a specialist in this space and had shared that with me. Early diagnosis. At 85, if I divide this room into thirds, 1/3 of you will have it, the other third will be the caregivers, and the rest of you are going to pay for us. Please think of it that way. I mean, this is big. The diagnostics have gotten better, but there are no disease-modifying therapies. There's a gentleman in the audience. How many of us have seen early onset Alzheimer's disease? Whoa. The numbers are growing because the diagnostics are better and very few options to treat. We do the best we can. I describe in the book my husband's progression. My husband was chief of hematology oncology at the NIH and in total denial that he had the disease. So I had to play into his reality, trying to run interference and protect him. And of course, I had the situation with the doctors. But again, as a journalist, I've only gone public 2 times. And 12 years into the disease, and my husband was so dangerous, I was told I could not bring him home. He was in the hospital for 2.5 months. They turned him out to me with Depakote, 14 Depakote and 6 Ativan a day. That's used for seizure drugs. I weaned him off of everything bit by bit, but no facility wanted us, by the way, and they don't have to take you. Depakote is for epilepsy, seizure drugs, but they're trying everything because they don't know, and the doctors don't know, quite frankly. Oh, we have a doctor in the house. I would say it's trial and error. I think is that an honest way to phrase it, Dr. Levine? It's trial and error, and we are left to manage the symptoms, but no one wanted us, so I left my career to take care of my husband. I went public, and as a reporter, I wanted people to see the physicality of the disease, to respect that this is not custodial care. This is living with someone in their space. I invited PBS in, and I lost control of the narrative. I was not the reporter in control. I couldn't edit the story. So I said, please protect my husband's dignity, because the role of the caregiver is to protect a loved one's dignity. But in that, we've done a disservice because we really don't talk about what this disease is really like. So this is what happened when I went public.
This is how Meryl Comer begins each day, crouching in the dim morning light to empty her husband's urine bag.
Just a minute, love, I'm coming.
That accomplished, she removes his catheter and helps him out of bed.
Okay, I'm going to swing your legs around. Hard.
In a moment, she'll get one of the occasional fleeting acknowledgments that he knows she's there. He's probably not aware she's his wife. More likely, she's a familiar presence.
Hi. Good morning. Good morning. You okay?
Harvey Grolnick, Comer's 70-year-old husband, is in his 12th year of Alzheimer's disease. He's entering the final phases, when most normal human interaction ceases and patients completely withdraw.
Let me check your eyes, love. Honey, we're having some problems with your eyes.
As devoted as she is to caring for him, Comer told us she's now in her 12th year of something like hell. Comer's story echoes that of millions of families across the country coping with the ravages of this mostly untreatable and so far incurable disease.
It's an equal opportunity destroyer. It doesn't care what color you are. It doesn't care how much education you have. It doesn't care how much money you have. It can destroy you.
They may have exhausted their financial resources in addition to their emotional resources. There's actually always a second patient with Alzheimer's disease because the caregiver requires attention by the physician as well.
The second patient in this case, Comer, was a long way from that when her husband first fell ill.
Hello, I'm Meryl Comer on special assignment in Tokyo.
Then a TV newswoman, she spent her days interviewing business leaders, Washington political figures, and even presidents. Divorced from her first husband and with a young son, Comer had married Grolnick in 1980. He was then at the peak of a prestigious career as a physician and scientist specializing in blood-related cancers at the National Institutes of Health. But in the mid-1990s, Grolnick was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's and eventually had to leave NIH.
I've seen enough cases to know that it has little or nothing to do with the use of the mind. I think there's too many successful, ambitious type A's who've gotten it to justify that theory.
Comer eventually quit her job and became Grolnick's full-time caregiver. As often happens with Alzheimer's patients, he'd also become paranoid, delusional, and occasionally even violent.
All personal care was a confrontation.
Push them.
When the mind's dementing, they don't understand personal care, so they take it as if you're attacking them. I had my front teeth knocked out in the hospital.
Alzheimer's is not the gradual dementia that everybody thinks it is. It goes in another direction. It's frightening. It's physically frightening, and it's terrifying. The sad thing is you don't really have a good memory of your mom when you lose her this way. And what the caregiver does mainly is keep the secret.
The behaviors are inappropriate. Inhibitions are the first to go. One of the chapters of the book that I have yet to write is That Your Husband Peeing on the Barbecue? Subtitle, Social Improprieties and Why Invitations Stop Coming. You get embarrassed. You protect them. You pull them away. Nobody sees them. Nobody sees the horror at night.
We lent her a camera to record scenes when we were not there. She captured one typical nighttime calamity, when her 6'2" husband, weighing 200 pounds, falls to the floor and can't get up.
Harvey, please help me, love.
Aside from those dramatic episodes, even routine caregiving tasks are taxing, especially on the staggered 4 hours of sleep Comer says she
But they
gets
were
most
looking
nights.
at the well
Determined to help his
patient.
life
And
stay
let
as
me
ordered as
tell you
possible,
that
Comer
there are men in the audience who have cared for their loved ones. I know what I do for a husband. And Tony, what you do for your wife, and I know you're surrounded by friends, and I know she was young when she got it. She was 54 when she was diagnosed. It takes my breath away, quite frankly. So tributes to the men. even though we do know that it impacts women and that we tend to be more the caregivers. Men like to fix things. And right now, this disease can't be fixed. Women are better at living in the space. Look at the statistics on the women. And this, to me, is very upsetting. We are losing about 10 years of our life in caregiving, of our longevity. We are 6 times more likely to get Alzheimer's ourselves due to the stress of the disease. Now, I was upset by that statistic. I was also upset by another statistic. The average caregiver today is 48 years old, raising her children and taking care of her parents, more typically the parent than the spouse. In the military, it's 28 years old. Children taking care of children. And we know so this issue is on a continuum. This is not just at the end of life, because trust me, there is stigma in many cultures around this disease. And we are not talking about a disease that we have to get angry about, which is why I am willing to step forward, and I call it coming out of the shadows. If we don't talk about it, if we don't say this is unacceptable for our children, this will be a legacy. And I have to tell you, no matter what I've done for my husband and my mother, and by the way, my mother has had it for the last 10 years, and she's in my dining room with the disease, and my husband is in the other room. My mother never liked my husband well. So can you imagine her in dementia? Very, very difficult situation. What bothered me about this, and fortunately I was rescued. Caregivers lose their self-identity of who they are. You forget because you're so focused on caring for a loved one. I was rescued because I became this wild advocate and started writing and was recruited to run the Jeffrey Bean Foundation. And 100% of the net profits of their company fund philanthropy. So I could dress all the men in the audience in head to toe for Jeffrey Bean. And it goes to cancer, it goes to protection of women and children, veteran support. But I say that the trustee saved my life by letting me fight a disease on the outside because I was on the inside. So one thing I've done is I created something called the 21st Century Brain Trust. If we can't talk about the disease because we are 60's the new 40 and we are into this, then we better go find a safe zone to have a conversation. It is just smart to have a brain baseline. It is smart to know. And we've created something that we just launched this September called the Healthy Brain Study. Oh, is it coming? No. Can I capture it? I guess we've lost that slide. It's the Healthy Brain Study. We asked you to go online. It's still running. It's an IRB study. If you are caring for a loved one, it's open for men and women. And the idea is you do a survey and then you take a brain performance test. In 8 weeks online, we had over 837 completions, and we are beginning to analyze the early data. What we're finding is that we're too stoic. Because we don't see that we have options, we sort of just lock in and tough it out. When you look at the brain performance tests, caregivers are operating at less than 50% cognitive vitality. Lack of sleep, the stress, cumulative issues that are very big in our space. I'd like to push the envelope one more time and ask you your opinion on this. And even with my glasses, I can't see it. Have any of you considered genetic testing or gone through it? You've done it? Okay. If heart disease was in your family, would you consent to a screen? Raise your hands. If Alzheimer's disease ran in your family, would you take the test to find out? Those of us who have seen the disease up close, I think we need to know. I've taken the test and I went public. I did it with Terry Moran on Nightline. Terry Moran's one of 9 children. His mother had early onset. He was terrified to take it. I said, you take it, I'll take it. The difference was I opened my results to camera without a genetic counselor in the room. I received a call when it aired because I found out that I have one of the alleles. 2, you are on a straight pathway for the disease. One of them gives you 50-50. I'm slightly more at risk, but that's true because my mother has it, and it will be on the maternal side of the family. I got a phone call from my son, who is 44 years old, and said, Mom, what the hell did you just do? He said, you can't get insurance. And that was the main concern. So one of our goals is to get rid of roadblocks that stand in the way of people stepping forward. Think about what they're doing now with cancer. Look around at other diseases. If we don't step forward and know, we will be out of time. There's an A4 trial that's being run. It's called a prevention trial. All of the late stage trials failed. We are now going to asymptomatics. You have to admit to being 65 plus and are willing to step forward, but this is the future. We have to step forward and be part of finding out so we can catch the disease before it actually starts. That is our goal. Now, why? Because I want to wrap up and actually give us time to talk. And by the way, I do want to thank Mitch. Mitch is taking a risk on a first-time author. And I really, and on a tough topic. So thank you for bringing me into your store. No, I really mean that. This is, so he's a brave man, but I saw him. What I love about this bookstore, Mitch, is I saw you in the afternoon actually stocking it yourself. And I thought, with love and care. So thank you very much for, but why do we care? You know, the big issue, and I'm going to push past this other, is longevity. Are we ready for the future? Do you know why Betty White is so popular, or George Burns? It's because that's the way we all want to be when we're their age. We want to be feisty. We can see ourselves that way. The only way we're going to get there, to make sure we get there, is to make sure that we interrupt this disease, slow its progression, just as disease-modifying therapy, where we may have a shot. My husband doesn't know who my grandchildren, that we have 5 grandchildren. My grandson, who is, I have 3, the middle one runs into me and says, Nana, Nana, how could Gigi ever forget me? That's what breaks my heart. It interrupts the generations. That's what we're fighting for. We are fighting for our children and our grandchildren. It is not about us at this point in time. It is about the future. And again, in a spirit of why we want our brain span to match our lifespan, well, I did one of the last interviews with George Burns. His goal, and again, if you live forward, always have a plan, he wanted to be 100 and play the Palladium. So this is an excerpt from his, my interview.
Oh, to be 95 years old, able to charm audiences worldwide, even if it meant looking like George Burns.
The most important thing is to fall in love with what you do for a living. That's terribly important. To get out of bed at 95 and have something to do is important. No sense staying in bed. I can't make any money in bed.
See you later, Fred.
Goodbye, Ginger. Gracie always got nervous when we walked on the stage. I never got nervous. To get nervous, you have to have talent.
How many cigars do you smoke a day?
Well, the minimum is 10. I smoke between 10 and 15 and maybe more.
I did a little checking up on you.
You did?
Yep, dry martini, double up with 2 onions.
That's right.
Don't drink water.
That's right.
Don't eat vegetables. What does your doctor say about it?
He's dead.
I want you to know that the response to the book, 100% of the proceeds from the book, by the way, support Alzheimer's research. This is a hard topic to talk about. Even as friends, sometimes there are no words. What has made this worthwhile because there was no cathartic in writing it, is that people say thank you for being honest. Thank you for saying what it's really like. By page 100, I thought you were telling my story. So that to me is unfortunately the idea of bringing us all out and having a conversation. Now, the floor is open. I'd like to bring up Dr. Levine to join us. You read the book. Yes. Can you? Well, I
just want to thank you, Meryl.
Oh, thank you.
I had to pry the book away from my wife, I confess. She read it in 2 days, and then I read it in 2 days, and I couldn't put it down except I had work to do. It's a fantastic book because it's such a brave book that you put together. Very few people write books that involve themselves, that talk in first person, and you opened yourself up to the world, which is important, because from my point of view, I see too many people who really don't know what's taking place with their family members. And I'm going to give you an example. How many people here have had a family member with diabetes? Okay, hold your hands up. Cancer? Okay. Some long illness. It could be heart disease, stroke, anything like that. Almost everybody in the room, right? Okay. During all of that time, were you able to talk to the person? You were able to have a relationship with the person? My father had Alzheimer's disease. My mother-in-law had a rapidly progressive supranuclear palsy. She was supposed to be dead in 6 months. She never read the book. And she went for many, many years. And we lived through the same things that Meryl did. And so when I met this wonderful woman a few weeks ago, we started chatting about these things. And she asked me to come talk tonight because there's so many things you don't know about what you don't know. I'm not an expert in Alzheimer's disease, but I've dealt with a lot of people. I do critical care and emergency medicine mostly. I'm an internist. In addition to all of those things, we started talking about the dying process. And Meryl said, you know, I'm good because I have a living will, and I have an advance directive. And I said, really? Okay, how much protection does that give you? How many of you people here have a living will? Advance directive? Good, so do you have 10 copies? How many people have 10 copies? Okay, so let me walk you through the nightmare, because you've lived it with your family member, which is amazing you were able to get through it. My father got violent as well, and it was very difficult. He threatened to shoot somebody. He didn't even have a gun. But the police came and fortunately put him in a psychiatric facility where he was treated for his Alzheimer's rather than incarcerating him with people he had no business being with.
Can I just add a sidebar to that? My mother reported me to social services for holding her against a will in a penthouse apartment that I wish I was living in because I had to keep her away from my husband. I conferenced in the doctor immediately. I mean, we all have these stories to tell, but those are the kinds of situations that we get into in these diseases.
Reading your book, I was impressed that your mother and my mother must have been very good friends for a very long time. So the reason I bring up some of these touchy topics, and it's interesting because I've taught medical students and residents and fellows for decades, is that it's such an emotional topic, and we all deal with it poorly because you're not armed with the information that you need. So here's the issue that my mother just went through. My mother just passed away last week, and she had a living will. She had an advance directive. She has power of attorney. I do all those things. Okay, and she went to the hospital, and despite having it, when she got to the hospital, they didn't know she had it. So I went up and I said, do you know my mother has a living will? No. Do you know she has an advance directive? No. Do you know that it's the case of her heart stops beating, that she doesn't want you to pump on her chest and break every rib in her body? They said, no. So then they asked me to sign a form, and I said, my mother's cogent. My mother had mild cognitive impairment, not really Alzheimer's, and she was still able to read and make decisions. So she had to refill out the forms. Then she went home for 12 hours, got sick, went back to the hospital. She had to do the same thing again. Then she went transferred to a rehab facility. And I just had a premonition, and I called up the rehab facility, and I said, you know my mother has a living will. That did come with her from the hospital, correct? And they said, no. You know that she's a DNR, do not resuscitate, and also don't put her on life support? Big issue, okay? And you need to be very precise. Language is important. You know, when you hurt somebody's feelings, you may have meant to say something different, but you didn't. Okay? So I said, all of those documents were filled out. They said, well, can you come in to fill them out? I said, my mother's awake and alert. Go talk to my mother. She'll sign these forms. So what I tell my house staff and what I tell my patients is, make 10 copies. And they always look at me and they say, it's crazy. And we were talking about this. Why do I need 10 copies? Because you leave them right on the counter so that when the ambulance comes, because somebody gets sick, whether they're a hospice patient, I've taken care of countless hospice patients that got put on life support when all they wanted to be was comfortable. Okay, so when the ambulance comes, you hand them a form, and you put 9 more in your pocket. They take you to the hospital, to the ER. Where's the form? With the ambulance. You give the ER doc or the nurse one, and you have another one for the ER doc, because the nurse doesn't give it to the ER doc, they give it to the chart, which is someplace in, New York or California, and you're in South Florida. So you have an extra form. You say to the doctor, I have an advance directive. Everything's right. You go upstairs. Where's your form? In the ER. Okay, and now with electronic medical records, which means that everyone can communicate with everyone else, it's lost anyway. So you get to the floor and you hand the 4th or the 5th form to that person. And if you need to go to a different unit, you have a 6th form. And when you go home, I tell my patients, make 5 more copies. Okay, so that the next time you're covered. So devastating illness, the one person you rely on more than anything else you're going through this adventure with, it's not like cancer, because cancer you have each other and you help the other person through it. It's not like diabetes, and I've had too many patients. It's a horrible illness, you lose limbs and you have heart attacks, you have strokes, but you're with the other person. Here you're by yourself. And that was the other thing I wanted to really say, is that we're trapped as this. And when I was beginning my career, I couldn't understand why families would dump the patient in the ER for a weekend off. And now that I've seen it with my parents and so many other people, this is a tough life. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year after year. It's not for a week. It's not for a month.
May I ask you a question on that point? Because, and this is in the book, I really talked to the doctors, the doctors kept telling me, and my husband was early diagnosis, that he couldn't last. Well, I had gone through the hard part where he was violent, and I thought, I'll tough it out, because I've gone this far. I'll tough it out. There's the Girl Scout in me. It's generational. We're sort of stoic. If the doctors don't know, why can't they say, we don't know, or why can't they be honest with us?
That's a great question. So what we deal with is probabilities, right? My son just confronted me with a book where it scientifically looks at, can you have a drink when you're pregnant? Can you smoke when you're pregnant? And what's the real information? Because there is information out there. And so based on what they knew, they predicted that your husband would follow the usual course. Based on what they knew, they predicted my wife's mother would follow the usual course. But 10 years later, her mother was without speech, without any function, but still able to eat, which is one of the many things I was going to bring up with. If we have time and if people are interested tonight, we could talk about what can you do, what can you withhold. Okay, there's a lot of big topics. Your book brought up so many questions. I'll tell you an anecdotal story. I had a patient on life support in Houston. I moved here a couple of years ago. I ran a big intensive care unit at one of the best hospitals in the country. And this woman came in, and she was on maximal life support. She was on a ventilator, a breathing machine to help her breathe. She was on all kinds of drugs because her blood pressure was so low, there was no way she could survive a minute without those drugs. And I met with her family, and we decided to make her comfort care and take her off all these things and let her pass away comfortably. We backed off on the drugs for her blood pressure, and her blood pressure came up. We backed off in the ventilator. She started breathing. 2 days later, she went home. Now, the good news is her son, who was one of the biggest attorneys in the entire United States, who won multi-billion-dollar cases. I mean, he's not a beginning attorney. This guy is a major attorney. Can't sue me for being stupid. Okay, and I'm not that I'm stupid. It's just based on my experience, this woman was terminal. But you don't really know the answer to that question. If you're religious, if you believe in God, God is the only one who knows that. If you don't believe in God, then no one knows that. Okay, we can only give you our impression of what's likely. So when I have some patients who seem like they're agonal, sometimes we kind of know. We really do know for a fact when it's really that close to the end. But otherwise, it's an educated guess.
Yes. Well, let's go back to the point. It's always too soon before it's too late. Please find a way to have the conversation. It's not one conversation. My husband left such a financial mess for me. It took me 4 or 5 years to unravel it. He used to do the taxes, and he was taking care of me, so I signed. It was so nice to be taken care of, I thought. He was tucking them away and hiding them on his way down. So it took me 4 or 5 years. You have to fight. I mean, it's almost insulting what happens. If you love someone, then I think you really need to step forward and have these conversations earlier.
My residents, doctors that have finished medical school that are training to learn how to be an internist, to do subspecialty care, were furious with me when I suggested to them the best time to have these conversations is when they first meet their patients in their 20s. What better time to have a conversation than with somebody who's not threatened? If somebody is dying and I run over to you and I go, do you really want your mother to die or live? What normal human being is going to say, my mother, take her? Right? No one's going to say that. And so the time to have these hard conversations is when we're a step removed. You know, if you ever had a stroke and you couldn't do blah, 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 would you want me to do everything for you? If you had a heart attack, if you had cancer, at what point? My partner in Houston had in his will that if he couldn't earn at least 80% of his current earning, that he wanted to be taken off life support. Now that's crazy, but it brings up the point that the best time, and I'm looking around, and except for my son, there's not a lot of people here who are that young here today. And you're all my demographic, right? We're all 60s and 70s. Perhaps there's people older than that. I can't see the whole room, but we need to think about this when we could think about it rationally and have those conversations with the people we love. We need to let them know what we want. Not what they want, what we want. Okay? My mother, when she was younger, wanted everything, but by the time she reached the point that it was the end of her day, she said, I just want to be comfortable. And that's what we need to do as a physician. We need to respect those wishes. So there's lots of things. I actually looked through your book.
Oh, you did?
And I made a list, but I'm not going to read the list, but if your topics come up on my list, I'll be ready.
All right. This is really open for you. I will say, I'm sure you've all heard about music therapy. What is interesting about music therapy is that music infuses the brain so that it is not in one section of the brain. And that's why we're seeing that we can engage people in ways that we never thought about, because somewhere deep it touches you. So that's one of the last things to go. Olfactory senses. I still cook and make sure whatever my husband can take that I've made. He has not had Ensure yet. And one other last point. No one who has been on the front lines of care ever questions when somebody says, I can't do this anymore. No one. If you have known or cared for a loved one, we never question that. Never second guess. Please, in families, there's too much second guessing by long distance, and people who have not seen what you may be living with day to day in a very personal way. And again, a woman wrote to me and said, I'm sending this to all my kids. They don't get me. If that was helpful for them, then it was worth the writing. So is there a question? Well, we saw some hands, yes.
Let me throw out one more thing. Meryl made so many good points in the book. If you don't own this book, get this book and read it. I mean, it is compelling.
Mitch is going to kick us out in 5 minutes.
It's a compelling book. But one of the points she made there that's worth mentioning is you've all had people with cancer, with heart attacks, with horrible things. When somebody has a diagnosis of a bad illness, friends vanish. We're very uncomfortable dealing with that. And you talk about that beautifully in the book.
Except let me say, I have 2 friends here who were with me all the way, who never gave, who always let me know they cared.
Bravo.
And I love Judy for it, and Tracy.
We have friends with cancer, and it's like they're pariahs all of a sudden. When you have a friend with these things, you know, they want to be stoic. They want to hide because they're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they're suffering, but they're suffering quietly. extend the hand to those people. They really need company, even if it's a weekly visit, right? I mean, you needed that touch.
Even by phone,
Right.
even by phone, that was difficult. So let's take a question. Yes.
What about insurance? First of all, what have you done and what can people in your precarious situation when they know that their side, from their mother's side, they have it and then they take the test and they have the condition that is 50-50 or even worse, if they have the condition that is more closer to 100%, what can they do about insurance before it's too late, so to speak?
Well, that is a big issue for people about taking the genetic test. And under GINA, you are supposed to be protected from pre-existing conditions, but not for long-term care. And I must tell you that what is misunderstood in this country is that we assume that Medicare is going to pick up the costs. Everything in my husband's care was out of pocket. Out of pocket. We were rejected from facilities at $100,000 private pay annually. A facility that helped me for 3 months manage his medication so I could bring him home, $15,000 a month. Only place I might have trusted him, but I brought him home because I knew that we would be bankrupt. So build that out over years. It's getting worse. And if you look at the cost shifting in medicine today, we are responsible for our health, we are responsible for our care. So this cost is bankrupting. If you think of the average American who retires with $6,000 in savings if they're lucky, that is gone. And I say to women, buy it young. I bought my first long-term care policy at 50. My husband had no long-term care policy. But again, these are details. It's your time because I think we need to hear from them.
Long-term care will take care of.
Long-term.
If I get, let's say that I took the test, my mother had it, and I passed the test as high probability.
You cannot, they would probably not permit you to get a policy.
Before I do it, I can get
You
the
could buy the
long-term care
policy and then you
Right.
could.
So
that's-
you all need to hear the message. If you do genetic testing, an insurance company knows, before Obamacare, you're stuck. You can't get the policy. With Obamacare in the future, you probably will be able to get something, but it doesn't cover the whole thing. It defrays part of the cost. My mother-in-law had no assets, so she was able to get health care through Medicaid, not Medicare. Okay, I know a lot of people here probably think, well, Medicare will cover it. Well, will not. Okay, and so she was able to go into this wonderful nursing home where they took great care of her. She was lucky. The opposite of your experience, where there are a lot of nursing homes out there or facilities where the care providers don't really care.
The $24 billion is spent annually on families who go bankrupt, by Medicaid, on families who go bankrupt. And what are we bankrupting? We're bankrupting the dreams for our children. If the average caregiver is 48, they're choosing between things for their children while they're taking care of the. This is a trap. This is the sandwich generation. Yes, there's a question back there. Yes.
I know you said about how men trying to solve problems, and of course, I mean, this forgetting about the financial issue. I mean, you know, we talk about bankrupting for Medicaid purposes, but forgetting about that, why don't, you know, the caregiver is the one that's got the problem, you know, I mean, really living with this. Why not put the person in a nursing home? Again, forgetting about the finances for a moment. It seems like most people don't do that. They keep them at home, whereas if your spouse doesn't know you, why not just put the spouse in a nursing home?
70% of families try to take care of a loved one at home. If you have walked into facilities, if you have really watched, I was a reporter who slept on the floor of facilities with my husband. I saw what went on, and it made me physically ill. Nothing has changed 20 years later, with all due respect, and unfortunately, there are no better options. You either manage the care at home, or you better be at that institution, undress your loved one, make sure there are no bed sores, because they are the ultimate victim.
Unless you have an awful lot of money in the bank, you can't afford it. Most people can't afford a year's worth of nursing home care for out of pocket, let alone 10 years of nursing home care. So if your insurance plan doesn't cover it, which most don't, Medicare won't,
until you're destitute. So you'll go through every penny in your bank account, assuming it's your loved one, let's say your spouse, for example. And when you have nothing, and when you have no house left or to live in, then Medicaid would kick in, and it's a horrible way to spend your senior years. And every time I hear the discussion in the newspaper about, we can't afford Obamacare, we can't afford this, I'm thinking, what if that was me? One of my friends, when he was in his 40s, had a brain tumor, and he's still alive. Thank God it was a benign brain tumor, but it destroyed his career. And he's like yelling, yeah, Obamacare is destroying the country. And I look at him, his name was Tom, I go, you're crazy. If not for that, you would be on the street. You'd have nothing. You and your wife would be destroyed. So think about these things. There was a question way in the back.
Yes.
Mitch, you had Neil Barnard here talking about Alzheimer's and nutrition and how possibly the impact of being a vegan or eating a whole food plant-based diet could basically forestall it if you start out at a young age. I'd like to get your comments on that. The second observation is what you had just said about having to bankrupt yourself financially. When your husband was first diagnosed, did you go to someone about trying to get Medicaid benefits by planning your affairs ahead of time? Because there's a whole litany of things that you can do that will enable you to avoid the financial hardship.
Yes, I will be very honest with you. I was so incensed by elder care law in this country that teaches you how to shift assets, bankrupt yourself. I see that as a safety net for people who really need it in this country. And I did not see myself as really eligible, nor would I want to take away a safety net or ride on somebody else's back. So I thought to use the tax code that way was really upset me. My other option was to divorce my husband and still take care of him. Now, we ought to be annoyed by those kinds of options that we have in this country.
I would add that I told my wife the same thing. I said, if I'm ever that ill, divorce me. Don't abandon me, but divorce me. We've worked our whole lives together to try to have a happy ever after, where we could enjoy our later years together. I would hate to destroy her later years because I had an illness that bankrupted the both of us, and I'm gone, and she's stuck in her 60s or 70s or 80s and destitute. Reliant on the benefit and charity of others, that's not a way to be. And I don't want to burden my kids either. I think we need to think about those things. So my discussion with my wife was to divorce me, which is, again, it's a horrible way to deal with these things. But our society, which is the richest in the world, doesn't cover these things. How can we come to this point and not have, we're so lucky to live so long now, due to the advances in hygiene and the environment and everything else, and medical care, and yet we haven't prepared for it. So it's a big issue.
Answer the question, because you brought up the issue of nutrition. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. Right now, he's the doctor, and I never pretend I'm a scientist. But I will make one point. Do whatever you do. Try the Mediterranean. You can try it, crossword puzzles, more sex, use it or lose it, whatever works for you. But what bothers me in terms of public policy is that it undermines the impetus for research. If we think with a little bit of this and a little bit of that we can protect ourselves from Alzheimer's, we are kidding ourselves. And that is a dangerous mindset to be in. I believe in nutrition. We will try it all, but doctor?
I believe all things in moderation. If you drink occasionally, you're okay. If you drink a lot every day, you're in trouble. If you want to eat a terrific steak like I just came from, that's great. But you need to have a balanced diet. I don't believe in vitamins as a miracle cure-all. I don't believe in pills. We have a lot of tools that could help us, a lot of drugs that will help improve your health. If you have high cholesterol, we could lower it. If you have some other issues, we could often ameliorate them. But all things in moderation make sense to me, and there is no miracle cure. You went through that with your husband. There have been a series of drugs that come out on the market, all of which are supposed to delay the onset of this neurological deterioration. They don't work that well. And I would use as an example cancer drugs that now cost $100,000 a year and have a 10% chance of improving you by 30%. It's like, holy cow, how did we come to such difficult numbers? It used to be easy. If your appendix ruptured and I took it out, you lived. It was really very, very straightforward. So I would tell you, be wary of some of these miracle cures. Yeah, eat healthy, exercise, the trying to keep active. There's a lot of writing about doing mental exercise to try to keep yourself young. But if you were dealt a bad hand, you need to be prospective in dealing with it and say, I do have a 50%. If you had the allele and had 50% chance of it, you have to say, I need to plan for that. Okay, you can't hope to have a good outcome. Plan for the worst, hope for the best, and that's a good way to doing it. We'll get back to you in a minute. I know you've had your
And
hand.
I don't think any of us really would want to be remembered that way. If you have seen this disease, I don't want to be remembered that way by my grandchildren.
Now, how many of you would want to be, unfortunately, like Harvey, your husband, not aware of what's going on, not able to interact, but go be taken to the hospital and the family member says, please do everything for them, I want everything. Wouldn't that kind of make your skin crawl? I see patients with ulcers down to the bone in fetal position because they're so contracted from their illness, from their dementia. And the family says, I want everything. Not my family. My wife knows what I want. My kids know what I want. If I'm that sick, make me comfortable. Plan ahead. Plan for the worst. Okay, hope for the best. You had a question.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Know what you would suggest we do to help change public policy, to do something about what's going on, rather than feel this is terrible. What can we, from our position, do to make a difference?
Well, thank you. We have gone forth and created a group called Us Against Alzheimer's. We are much more deliberate. We don't want incremental change. Our goal is to find a disease-modifying drug by 2020. Out of respect for the various cultural differences, we have Latinos Against Alzheimer's. We have Women Against Alzheimer's that I co-founded because, not unlike cancer, women will need to step forward in great numbers and do what they do. African Americans, culturally the stigmas are different, the respects are different, what we do. If you will know, in Japan right now, they actually are thinking about robots as caregivers because there will not be enough caregivers to take care of the elderly populations in Japan. That's how bad it's gotten. But stepping forward, saying it's unacceptable, paying attention, watching the research, 100%, as I said, of the book, goes to Alzheimer's research, but they're not spending enough. And we can see the train wreck coming, so we really encourage you all. There's something in the book that will show you if you want to join on. We need your voices. We need you to step out and join us in this fight. We are going to move to the side because body language tells me that we have overstepped.
Can I just
what?
I'm not cutting anyone off.
Can I just say one more thing?
Absolutely.
As you deal with these things, first of all, I know there's more questions. We'll stay for a few more minutes unless you're in a
We'll
rush.
stay on the side.
We'll stay on the
yes,
side to answer more questions because I know you've been so patient. And a few more things. How much is enough? What can I hold back? Okay, these are big questions that you should discuss with your family and with your physician. Okay, because physicians are the same as you, they're human beings, and some of them are uncomfortable withholding things. So withholding food is horrible, isn't it? Not usually when somebody's at that point, okay? Forcing food on somebody. Why would you force anything on somebody? So there's all different shades of gray that you need to deal with when you start thinking about advanced directives and what you would want and not want. If antibiotics would make you better and they could give it to you by mouth, great. But if you can't swallow, should we put a tube down you? Should we make a hole to feed you? Lots of things to think about. I want to applaud you. You're a hero to me. For your braveness and your willing to come forward and address this very, very important topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Levine, for joining us. Thank you.
All right, then, a quick reminder for our internet audience watching at home, there's still time for you to call the number on your screen. Yes, there is. Buy a copy of Slow Dancing with a Stranger. We will have Meryl sign it for you, and we'll ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. I want to thank our great guest speaker this evening, Dr. Robert Levine. For those of you here in the house, the book will be for sale at the counter over there. Meryl will be signing to the left of the screen, and please give her another hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, if when you
you.